Welcome everyone. I'm Triona Sheeran, and this is the book launch of Karen Frances McCarthy, Till Death Don't Us Part. So you have your book here. And we're also joined by Minister Colin Bates and David Schiesser. So a huge welcome. I know it can be difficult for some people to get on Zoom. We've been working on Zoom all week. You know what? This definitely is one not to be missed. Honest to God, definitely one not to be missed. So today we're going to be talking about the book, and we're also going to be talking to Colin and David about their input in the book and also their belief systems and how they work with mediumship and healing. And I know you're all following on Facebook. Just about Zoom, we'll only be taking questions on Zoom. We just can't take them on Facebook. But if you have any questions, I'm sure Karen can log into Facebook at a later stage and address some of them for you. And this will also be shared again after. So all of those attending today on Zoom, a huge welcome. Hello. And what I would suggest you do is wait until I prompt you just to pop a few questions in the chat box later, and we will be getting round to them. In the meantime, you have the privacy because your faces isn't shown, but we can see your log on and we can see your comments all here in the chat. And you're all very welcome. So this, as I said, it's from Karen Frances McCarthy, CSNU. Karen is Irish, but she's living in New York. Do you see the bush there, Karen? She's living in New York. So she goes between the two. Karen is a medium and healer. She runs lots of different various teaching and trainings. So pop over to her website and she'll talk about that later. But this today is a book for different people. It's going to resonate on different levels. It truly is. For me, it resonates on one level, and for all of you reading or having read it, will resonate on different levels. But Karen, this book is published by White Crow Books as well, isn't that right? Okay. It is a memoir, and that's very important. We'll talk about that in a moment. But this is a book about awakening, grief. It's a love story. It's very well written. So Karen Frances McCarthy in this current life, in a former profession, yeah, because I do past lives, I always have to say not past life. So she was a political and a war correspondent, and she also was a published author before this book. So this book is really well written, very easy to read, and I'm sure all of you could appreciate that. We're also joined by Colin Bates. So Colin Bates, we were just discussing earlier, is extremely modest. So Colin is a SNU, Spiritual Nationalist Union, and he's a tutor. He's a teacher also at the Arthur Finlay College. He runs various ones. I say you probably run some online as well, Colin, at the moment. He teaches to all different levels. That's right, isn't it? Beginners and I know a lot of teachers of your kind of professionalism and pedigree don't often teach beginners. So actually, I have to say it's wonderful to see that you teach all different levels. So he runs courses for people all around the world as a medium and a teacher. And then we have David Schiesser. He's from Switzerland and he moved to the UK. And then you've been demonstrating your mediumship and healing around various different churches, spiritualist churches around the world for over 10 years. So really, truly well experienced in there. DSNU. I'm not too sure myself what the D is for, but I'm sure you can tell us about that later. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's diploma holder of the SNU, is it? Yeah. So so together, really wealth of experience between the three of you, I have to say. So I'm really excited just to get into those really deep questions myself. This just is an absolutely incredible book. I did read it twice, I'll be really honest, and it resonated with me on a personal level. So the awakening aspect, I know many of you are really going to, so a lot of you struggle with that, the physical and the emotional effects of awakening into spiritual life, spirituality, and Karen, you cover that so well in the book. So Karen, can I ask, why did you choose, because you were a political and war correspondent and you were also a journalist, so why did you choose to write this book in the style of a memoir instead of more like an investigative journalist?
Yeah, an investigative journalist piece. Well, it took me 10 years and a lot of persuasion to get around to writing the book at all, to begin with. And the actual journey at the time was a lot of investigation because, as you mentioned, I was this diehard skeptic. I had no religious beliefs. I had been raised Catholic and fled the church and never looked back when I was 17. And the only spiritual practice I ever had in the intervening years was Zen, which is a non-theistic practice, and it doesn't believe in this, you know, it doesn't subscribe to the same concepts of like reincarnation, etc., that Tibetan Buddhism does. So it's about the closest thing to a nihilistic religion you can get, and it suited me perfectly fine just to sit and meditate and just expect that someday my atoms would be reabsorbed into the cosmic cauldron, and that was it. So when the series of events in this book came along, it was an incredibly difficult turn to make. And a lot of what I included in the book was me going and sort of presenting the incidences as they happened, and then going and trying to talk to somebody or read something that might help me understand all of these strange things. And I'll read a couple of them in a minute, but I understand all these strange things as something that was coming from something outside me. So in other words, it wasn't me having a nervous breakdown. Something else was going on. Now, I have to admit, at the beginning, I thought I've gone out of my mind with grief. So, you know, the book starts with my fiance, who we'd only been engaged 3 weeks when I went on assignment to Virginia, and back in New York, he died of a sudden massive heart attack one afternoon, just like that. So it starts with that, and after that, all sorts of odd things started happening. So I just wrote what was happening in the book as it was happening. And mostly I did that, Triona, because I thought, you know, if I sort of sit down now 10 years later and start writing this non-fiction book, that's let me tell you what all of this means, let me tell you everything I've read, and let me tell you everybody I've interviewed and what they've said. I just thought, you know, I'm going to be talking at people. And nobody likes to be talked at, you know. So, and I thought, you know, people do philosophy very, very well. But I thought the benefit of probably my experience was that if I just present it as it happened, and I just present the information I was acquiring and distilling as it happened, then it just allows the reader follow that story, and then they're being presented with everything I discovered, and then they can make up their own mind. So I really just try to tell the story as honestly and as I could, and just put it out there for people to make up their own mind. And I've actually had, and I wasn't trying to set out to convince anybody of anything, you know, I really just, nobody could have convinced me of anything if the bed hadn't started moving, you know? And I'm fully aware that for people like me, if their bed's not moving, they're not going to believe anything I say or anybody else says. So I thought the best thing to do is just tell the story. And now I have had some people who were like me, diehard skeptics, and I've been actually very, very surprised at a bunch of people who read it and were sort of like, oh, maybe I could entertain this idea. And then read the book and went, okay, you know what, I actually think there's something to this. You know, which, and fair play to them, because in all honesty, if somebody had shown me this book 15 years ago, I probably wouldn't have even read it, because I just couldn't, my head just didn't work like that, you know. But I think that's the nature of awakening. You know, it's not, it sounds like it's a beautiful, pretty thing with angels and harps on clouds and butterflies and whatnot, but it's actually brutal. You know, it comes about because something brutal has happened, and our whole world, our whole belief system, everything is upended, and you suddenly find yourself sort of just floating in the ether with everything you thought you knew upended, and everything you thought you were now just out the window, and you're just standing there and you've no idea what's going on. So it's very, very humbling as well. And I think the humility that those sorts of experiences bring is what allows us open up to the possibilities of actually starting to, you know, to really consider something far greater than me is going on here, you know. And now I will say at the beginning, it was very scary. And I'll read a scene from that in a minute. Um, and I found my way to Colin Bates because I had been tormented by people, you know, with their perspective and their projections and their superstitions and their belief systems, sort of piling all of this stuff on me and telling me all sorts of scary things. And so I dragged myself almost on my knees up to Colin Bates one day and started talking to him about this. And he just, and I think Colin will probably talk to us about this a little later, just really helped me calm down and just open up. And then it was after that I realized that this is really something that is so important and so helpful to so many people. So to come back to your original question, I thought it would be more effective just to present the story, you know, and sort of keep people engaged, rather than, there's a lot of books out there, and if people do want to find more information about signs or about mediumship or about the afterlife, there is an awful lot of literature out there since the Victorians, you know, about, and some lovely stories out there, starting even in the 19th century, about these phenomena. So I really just thought, you know what, I don't really feel like I can add anything more to the discussion in that non-fiction sort of way, but maybe I can add my story, and that hopefully will be helpful. Does that answer your question, Triona?
Absolutely, because I have to say, it read very, very well, and I think it read so easily because you decided to do it as a memoir.
Yeah, I think when people are just presented experiences and told you, just, I'm not trying to convince you. I think the minute you start trying to convince people of something, people get very defensive. I mean, we just see this all the time in the world. People don't really want somebody else coming along necessarily and challenging their beliefs. If somebody wants their beliefs challenged, it's because they're ready, and they will find their way to a teacher, or they will find their way to an inspirer to ask these questions when they're ready to hear answers. If you're not ready to hear answers, you're not going to hear them, no matter what anybody tells you. So I didn't want to go down that road with it. I thought, let me just tell it. Now, I have to admit, writing a memoir is a really difficult thing, because, you know, you have to kind of present yourself warts and all, you know, which it's, you know, initially I was then writing the scenes, and I was coming across, and I was like, you know, so, you know, such a nice person, and, you know, and I sat in a writers group here in New York, and I would go down and I would read pages, and they were like, oh, come on. So I would have to go back and actually write. So there are actually some scenes in there where I behaved in really not the best way, and I thought they have to go in, because that's part of the story, you know. And so I'm not going to read one of those today. If you read the book, you'll find them yourself. But, you know, you really just, as part of being very, very honest to the experience, is also being very honest with how you get from where you were to where you ended up. Because that's not an easy journey. Anybody who has been in these situations knows it's not an easy journey, but it becomes you know, when tragedy happens, when difficulties happen, they can very often become opportunities to really just transform our lives, transform ourselves, do a terrific amount of healing. I mean, the healing that I went through in this was phenomenal, you know. And I also, and I think David will talk about this later, I do see that my, you know, Johan on the other side, over the course of time, I could see things in him even change in the communications, you know, things that he couldn't and wouldn't have been able to do here walking around on 2 feet. Over time, I started to see that sort of vulnerability and openness in him, which I do attribute to the ability to be able to heal on the higher side of the other spirit world as well. And I know this is a particular passion of David, so he'll maybe talk to us about that a little later on.
And Karen, let me just ask you, why did you choose to write on a real personal level about the love story of the two of you, the ins and outs, the real nitty gritty of it? Was it important to you to write about that for
Yeah,
yourself as well?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to sort of being very honest. You know, nobody's perfect. And if you try to present yourself as perfect, then you're going to lose people because you're just going to sound like a phony, because you would be a phony. And no relationship is perfect. It's all got its ups and downs. And so those had to be included, because otherwise it would be, this is not a real relationship. I mean, that's just not realistic. And that was part of the sort of like cringing, oh God, I need to put those words down. I need to admit, I need to fess up to this, you know, because otherwise I'm just going to sound like a phony. And it was really important to me that that you be able to read this book and go, no, she's honest. So, you know, if I'm being phony about me being, you know, a saint, or trying to present myself as a saint, then nothing is going to be believable, you know. So it was like, everything has to be honest from start to finish, because some of the things in it are so extraordinary that the reader has to trust me as the writer that I'm telling the truth in order to entertain these ideas. So that was key, I felt, to me in taking this approach to the book.
I agree. Yeah. It's just, I'm kind of giggling to myself as well, because here on my bookshelf, I have a book on schizophrenia. So when I went through something similar, lose my husband, then awakening and stuff like that, I actually thought I was schizophrenic. So I bought loads of books. So did you ever question, until you saw the bed move, and you talk a lot about that in the book, and actually the first few chapters of the book, did you ever question, am I crazy? Or did you just have that utter belief until you saw it?
No, God, not at all. I thought I was completely gone. I thought I'd had a nervous breakdown. I thought I had become, the grief had made me delusional. I was very annoyed with myself for that, because I had been, you know, I had been such a pragmatist and so practical and so balanced and down to earth. I had just been crawling around in the sand and the mud and the creeks and the misery of Iraq in the middle of the war, and came back unscathed. And now this is happening. Of course, you know, not only, you know, I mean, one of the scenes in the book is where I thought, I can't believe that my mind is not managing this. Do you know, I really thought it was delirium. And in one of the scenes in the book, I went out I was in Virginia, it was blistering hot, and I was on my own in this big creepy house anyway, which was the truth. This house was really big and creepy that I was house sitting. And I just went out for a walk one day and happened upon a priest in Virginia, a Catholic priest in Virginia. and I looked at him, and I, you know, I hadn't spoken to a priest since I was probably 17 years old. And I looked at him, and he had such a kind face that I just burst into tears on his doorstep. I was like, you know, and I was just standing there bawling, crying. He kind of had to usher me off the doorstep and into the living room, make me a cup of tea, you know. And I sat down and I told him, oh my God, Father, my fiance has died and I've lost my mind. And he was one of the first people that said, oh no, these strange things aren't you losing your mind. These are signs. And he shared a couple that he'd had with me. It's in the book, about a grandfather clock of his father's that's, you know, had never worked, that started chiming the day of his father's funeral. And I didn't just jump on board with that, but I did go off reading lots and lots about that, and started to go, well, this is a lot more common and is being experienced by perfectly rational people. And it was kind of the one thing that kind of creaked open the door a little bit for me to start entertaining a notion that maybe this wasn't me, you know, having some kind of breakdown from grief.
Absolutely. And actually, just so many people are going to benefit from hearing about that, you know, they're going through something similar with the signs, paying attention to the signs around them. And I do believe your excerpt is going to talk about that from the book. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah, one of the people I met very early on, who was a grief therapist, who he's since passed, but was Professor Lou Legrand, and there is a couple of scenes with him in the book early on, helping me try to make that mental shift that this could be a possibility. The scene I can read was a couple of early on, those kind of weird things that happened that made me, I think, would make anybody think that they had lost their minds. Shall I read?
Lovely.
Okay. So I went to bed that evening with my iPad and scrolled for something on Netflix to distract me from the past. A floorboard creaked. A shiver ran up my spine. I peered into the hallway with the uncomfortable feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, but there was no one there. Later, having watched a few minutes of everything and all of nothing, I drifted off. My iPad must have continued to pour faint flickers of light into the room until the battery died and the world fell to silence, broken only by the burp of a bullfrog, the hoot of an owl, and the heavy breathing of me sleeping. Creak. I jolted awake. The bed frame was groaning under a great weight. My heart raced. Someone had sat on the bed behind me. Someone big. Someone silent. Turn around, I told myself. I just couldn't move. Turn around, for God's sake. On 3. 1, 2, 3. I flipped around. No one. I scrambled up, got tangled in the sheet, fell over, whacked my face on the windowsill and bounced back onto the floor. Pain scorched my head. Get up. My hands were shaking. I fumbled with the switch of the gaudy lamp. It flipped on. No one was there. No one could have gotten down the stairs that fast and without a sound. I fumbled on the table for my phone to call 911 and then remembered it was in the kitchen. Shit. I picked up a glass Saratoga Spring bottle by the neck and crept down the stairs, peering into the dark, listening for any creak or rustle. No one could move in this house without the floorboards creaking. Except for the faint chirp of crickets and my own stressed breath, there was silence in every room and every stairwell, the whole way down to the kitchen, where I found the windows closed and the doors locked. No one could have gotten out. Then again, no one could have gotten in. I slipped out onto the front porch and sat on the steps in a t-shirt and boy shorts, clutching the bottleneck with white knuckles, hearing nothing but the normal sounds of the night. After an hour of sitting out there in the dark, I decided that I'd imagined the whole thing and went back inside. Still, I stood in the hallway for a few minutes, afraid to move, listening, hearing nothing, and no one. This was so stupid. 4 years earlier, I spent the summer crawling around in Iraq as an embedded journalist with the Stryker Division out of Washington and the 210 Mountain Division out of New York, washing with baby wipes and eating MREs to get the worm's eye view of the war. I waded through shit-filled creeks and hunkered down with the guys during rocket attacks in Sadr City. I'd walked in the footsteps of soldiers in front of me as we navigated IED terrain. I'd been crammed into Humvees in 120 pounds of body armor in 130-degree heat as we rolled outside the wire to bullets pinging off the metal and the gunner spinning his M2 in every direction. Now here I was in rural Virginia with a bruise on my forehead from imaginings in the night. Stupid or not, I didn't have the courage to go back upstairs. I wandered into the library, the smallest and most defensible room in the house, and picked up a book called Classic American Decorating. I curled up in the throw blanket on the chaise and flipped mindlessly through the pictures. It was almost dawn before I was calm enough to sleep. As I began to doze, the air around me seemed to change somehow, growing warmer or softer maybe. A feather-like sensation brushed my forehead and then both my eyelids like little kisses that felt strangely familiar, but I couldn't remember why. And the end of that, those little kisses that I felt, that's something that Johan used to always do. But at the time here, I didn't make that connection at this stage of the story, you know. But the next day, I was very annoyed with myself, and I got up and cleaned the whole house and was determined to get a grip on myself, and went out and sat underneath a tree out in the garden. And one thing that Johan used to do is he used to I used to have these hair extensions that were really long, and he used to tug on them. I would always feel, if he was behind me, I'd feel these little tugs on my hair when he was here. But, you know, when I finally cleaned the house and went out into the garden to get some air and get some sense, another thing happened, which is quite short, but this was the next day. I clambered up from beneath the pine tree. I needed to move. I needed to stop thinking. Every tiny thing sparked a memory of him. I needed to eat something. My stomach was stripped. I shook out my hair to get rid of what was stuck there that I couldn't see and went into the kitchen to forage for snacks. There were slim pickings except for a few oranges in the fridge. I took a couple, shut the door, and swung around to come face to face with a large, two-dimensional, solid black figure standing in the doorway. I froze. It looked like the black hole I'd seen on TV, with the perfectly crisp edge that delineated its dense dark form from the event horizon surrounding it. But this wasn't a black hole. It was crudely outlined and had no neck, so that the shoulders and head were fused like a gorilla. But this wasn't a gorilla. It was a tall, broad man, 6 foot easily, silent and unmoving. And he wasn't just blocking the doorway. He had been lurking behind me while I rummaged in the fridge. He disappeared. Tap, tap, tap. Juice was dripping onto my feet and all over the floor. I'd gripped the oranges so hard I punctured the skin. My breath was so shallow and my heart was still racing. I scanned the kitchen for an explanation. Billions of times a day, my brain created 3-dimensional constructs out of 2-dimensional images impinging on my retina. Neurons in my visual cortex made the 3rd dimension appear, but not this time. The kitchen was bright, so it wasn't a trick of the light. I couldn't blame it on peripheral vision, where floaters or fleeting black flashes often appeared in tired eyes. This, whatever it was solid, stationary, in full frontal vision, and by no means fleeting. So you can imagine why I ended up bawling, crying on a priest's porch after all that.
Absolutely wonderful. And this is right after, isn't it? When I was reading the book, the time frame was like only a few days after. Into
the next day. Yeah, the next day.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, you can imagine, you know, just I'm even imagining all that grief and all that sadness and the shock as well, and all of this happening. So no wonder you ended up in the preacher's door.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And I'm sure people will have loads of questions for you after. So we're going to go over now to Minister Colin Bates. So Minister Colin Bates is SNU. He's a renowned tutor and medium and healer. So sorry about that. I definitely should have got another cup of coffee before I join everyone this evening. So thanks, Colin. So how do you feature in the book, and what would you like to talk about today?
Well, I feature in the book as part of Karen's journey. I was visiting America, and I visit every year for the last 20 years to the most wonderful spiritual center called The Journey Within. And I was there with the Reverend Janet Nohavok, who we've been friends since the 90s. And it was there that I met Karen first of all. She came into the building and I was talking to Janet, and we were in the office. And then really we just got talking. And, you know, what is so wonderful is that when we come into the time of searching, and I always consider it to be the time of searching, that the power and the presence of the creative force is unique and is individual to the perception of each and every one of us. We find our own way, and I do honestly believe that. And we're coming into an age now where people are seeking to find their own way, where they're going beyond the confinement of that which has been taught to us. And so many people have so many opinions about what happens when we die. They don't even want to talk about or even say the word. And what I've found through the many years of studying the spirit and being with the sense of the spirit is the universal creative force. Call it what you will, it is the great mystery of all life. And it is the part of life that each and every one of us, the path that we must tread, however long or short that journey is, each one of us is moving towards that point. And within the sense of life and the pathway of life, love, like life, is eternal. You cannot die. You cannot destroy an energy. It's been scientifically proven. What happens at that moment called death is that there is a change of vibration of energy, and that the spirit world is really very much a real world. It's a world of light, a world of mind, and it interpenetrates the physical world. We're not always aware of it, you see, because the physical world is dominated by the physical mind. It's the power that always seeks to be the master of awareness, perhaps that's what we should say. And yet really there are many levels of consciousness that we touch as a normal part of our waking day. And you see, when we move into a moment of awareness and we let go of the physical aspect of mind, the subtle bodies of what we call the etheric system become aware in another way. And so the spirit world and it is a very real world, but we're not always consciously aware of it. In moments of quiet, in moments of stillness, you see, when we're not fully aware of the physical life, we have many such experiences. And the fact that we have left this life and world doesn't mean that I've stopped loving you, doesn't mean for a second that I've forgotten you. So we have a need, you see, in the physical life to know that all is well, to know that that continuation of experience and existence still exists. And it's the same within the spirit world, because true love is eternal. And so often, you know, we are so immersed within the grief process, quite rightly so, because it's as if a part of us is gone, is missing. But from the spirit world, you see, this need to reassure, to let us know that I am I and you are you, and together we are still a part of each other, is paramount. So when we have these experiences, it's moving our attention to the possibility. And that's really when we come into the nature of awakening, to really to be the seeker and the searcher, to understand this process more on a deeply emotional level that touches life, that touches love, that really brings us together. And this is where so many people have so many different misconceptions about what happens at that moment when we leave this life. For within the very breath of this world, we awaken to the reality, to that far and distant shore that is a part of this life and the continuation of life. For we are welcomed with love, with God's love. Call it however you choose to perceive it. No one is ever lost. We hear such stories of people saying, well, they've now got to wait. People, for instance, who take their own lives, they are lost. How can anyone be lost when we are surrounded and we are created of that one light, where love, like life, is everything? And really, when we consider the qualities of the power itself, love is the greatest of these, for it created you and I and the universe itself, together with compassion and understanding, and the power that knows all, understands all, and above all, loves all. And you know, if mankind began to embrace the simplicity of that reality, can you begin to imagine the revolution that would take place within our world? And make no mistake, our world is changing. And the equality of mankind is now being demanded. And it should have happened a long time ago, because we are all created of the one source, regardless of color, regardless of creed. And this wonderful nature of awakening, that is the one thing that all of us have in common. And it can happen at various times within life. My own awakening came when I was 16. And before that, even at the age of 3, I had experiences of the spirit world. And I know that if I hadn't have moved into that awakening, then my life would have taken a very different pathway. And so when I hear these stories, and people, you know, often come to me and they just need to move into a time of adjusting, a time of understanding, and a time of compassion and healing. Because when we go through such trauma, it is the ending of something, but it is also the dawning of another reality. It is the moving into this sense of, you know, I am not alone. I am still loved. And really, you see, the spirit world has no physical voice because it can't. doesn't exist within the same physical dimension. And so our thoughts, our memories, and our experiences is a way of communication, because it's the power of love. And it's also a way that the spirit world move our attention. And then also it can be within a physical sense, because when that moment is right, it is possible to create an experience that really brings our attention to this fact that I'm still here, that I am still a part of you, and you are still with me. And that is called hope. That is called love. Above all, that is compassion for the needs and the love of others. And, you know, I truly believe that more harm is done by the curse of ignorance and by the opinions of those who have either not studied or taken time, or are influenced by outdated modes of belief in heaven, in hell, you know, in retribution. And really, how can the power that we call God create such moments? It doesn't exist. It only exists within the mind of those who seek dominance over others. And if you go back in history, you see, there was the freedom of the priests, the prophets, the seers. They all had the natural power of being. And it was only within the conclave of Nicaea in 350 something AD that the Emperor Constantine, the first Holy Byzantium Emperor, brought into being the writing of the Bible, which then immediately took away the power of the natural life and said specifically, it is only the role of the priest who can talk to the spirit. And of course, you know, it brought great comfort to so many, because they then had that focal point, but then it also denied so many. And I think now, in the way that the world is, we're seeking liberation, freedom for our own thoughts, our own beliefs, and our own pathways. And so when we come into this time of grief, what we need is the healing, it is the compassion, and it is the knowledge and the understanding that really, you know, when I move forward into the spirit world, I am still the same. I am still the same mind, the same heart, the same experiences of life. And that which we share together is the eternal us. And you know, what is so wonderful within that is that when somebody passes, and then we pass, whether it is 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years until our moment comes, within that moment of breath, there is the recognition of totality of love. You know, I remember a young lady coming to see me, and she started sobbing, and she said, I'm so worried, she said, because I lost my mother over 20 years ago, and I'm worried that she won't recognize me anymore. And you know, when you hear such things, you just need to say, well, my darling, she will always love you. She will always be a part of you. And that when you meet and when you commune together through the power of your heart, they hear us, because that is how communication is created. When the physical mind is quiet, when we find that stillness within us, and we send the love to the power of the spirit, when we embrace the creative force in whom we move and have our very being, the spirit world exists within it, because that is a facet of God's love. And that is the power to heal and to bring the world together. And really, I think more and more, especially now within this age, mankind is seeking and searching to find their answers. Let's just hope they find them with the compassion and the love that it's need, for it will bring us together, truly. And I've known Karen now for all of these years, and her quest to seek and to find and to understand it within the mind is just such a joy. And we all have those moments when we question the very essence of who we are and life. And people speak about the blueprint of life. This was meant to happen at this particular time. Well, I don't necessarily believe that. You know, I believe that sometimes things come into being because they just happen, and that sometimes even accidents happen. And so, is everything ordained? I don't necessarily believe it is, but I do believe in the pattern of the awakening of life to the reality of the spirit, just as since the dawn of time, mankind has communicated with the ancestors, with the very power of the earth, the sea, and the sky, and the reality that it is truly there. But I do also believe that mankind, if we are not careful, will begin to lose the naturalness of the ability, because we are now within the age of mind. We are now have entered for some time into the technical age, where everything is found through the great God of Google. And mankind is less and less seeking to find those answers within themselves.
Yeah.
And so I also believe that we must never lose the reality of the joy, of the love, of the eternal power. And that also within each one of us, you see, we have this ability to be able to commune with the God force, with the power itself, that we have this ability, because you see, the divine spark of all life, you couldn't be more connected to it, because you are it, you see. And that's the great realization. When we stop and find that stillness, we begin to embrace it, and we begin to become it. And so really those words that came, you cannot be where God is not, is really the foundation of everything, because it's the power of everything, you see. It's the power of the breath, it's the power of life, and we are eternal beings of light, and love, like life, is eternal. It keeps us within the strength of all life. Has to, and it will change this world. Otherwise, if mankind doesn't stop and listen to what is happening now, we will just be lost. I can feel it. There is this great resurgence of need, and that's why you see the spirit world again will have this great resurgence within the life of mankind, because there is now another great need. And so really embrace the love that you are, and listen to the rationality of life. And if someone says to you something and it doesn't resonate with you, then just bless it and move on your way, because you'll never change the thoughts and the opinions of everyone. But every so often you will touch a point where light is exchanged, and love and knowledge, and they too will then move forward. And that's how a revolution is created.
Beautiful. And you said some things there that you said to me 10 years ago that were just...
I never did I?
Yeah, that no, the whole idea you said was so simple, and just like an epiphany, this idea that you cannot be where God is not. Because at the time when we met, you know, I had gone through all of those sort of scary things and met these people, and finally had this aha, oh my God, it's true, consciousness survives death. And with that, you know, is just a mind-blowing discovery, as you can imagine. But going from there then to try to explore that more, and coming back to New York and sort of sitting in circles, and, you know, other people started sort of popping in and giving me information for other people. And I realized that this is not just something that is between myself and Johan. This ability to communicate is universal. And so I thought, you know, I probably should go and do something with this, because I really didn't want to be meddling around or giving people, you know, I didn't want to do any harm. I really wanted to know what I was doing. And my first experience, I have to say, was not good, because I ran into the things that you mentioned briefly there, these sorts of superstitions and the sort of hangover from very outmoded ways of thinking and people not challenging their thought. But it is amazing how people can often present these things as if they're an authority. But the truth is, nobody ultimately knows the ultimate truth of anything. And so, but when you're in that vulnerable place where you're just starting to explore this world, it's very important to have somebody who's going to help you navigate that without, you know, getting beaten down by a lot of this. And I do remember when I met you, Colin, I had just been through this hell of people telling me, oh, Johan is lost, oh, he's this and he's that, or you're hanging on, you're holding him back, your grief is ruining his afterlife. I mean, every possible permutation of the story was given to me, except, no, he loves you, you love him, the connection continues. You know, this, you just need, you know, you can move forward together in a healthy way. That was the one thing that eluded everybody. Nobody came to me with that, but they had put me in such a state where not only did I was very worried then that I was harming him. This is where they put me. And when we met, and you said at one point, you know, and I was like, oh, they're telling me he's lost, I'm holding him back, he's in the dark, all this. And you had said at that point, how can he be lost? He cannot be where God is not. And I thought, God, you know, that is the simplest statement in the world, but it's the most true. It's the only true thing I've heard in the last 3 months. And so it was immensely helpful, which has really helped me then be able to, in a healthy way, move on and start exploring this world in a way that could be healthy for me and healthy and helpful for other people. It's so important to remember these things, and I'm so glad you came and talked to us about these things again today, because we just don't hear this enough. I think a lot of people could be spared an awful lot of suffering if only they understood this the way it is, and not the way Dante and medieval literature has influenced, you know, Western thought. It's so important, because it robs people. Like, I don't know who I would be now if I didn't experience and feel his love like that. Why you would deprive somebody of that, I have no idea. So it's beautiful to hear you talk about these things, and how healing this ultimately is for us, for them, for the world, just to understand, just to remove the fear of death, to understand that love is eternal. Because it's so painful, not only when somebody dies who we've loved dearly, are we deprived of their physical presence and the grief of that. The hollowness that comes from thinking we no longer have love is another area that people forget about as well. And so understanding that is just so key to us being able to live more fearlessly in our life and more compassionately in our life. And it was just such a small statement, but packed such a punch, because it was such an epiphany. So I'll never forget those words. You cannot be where God is not.
Well, bless you. I shall never, you know, sometimes, and I'm a great believer in, we meet sometimes for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, and each one plays its part. You know, I believe people come into our lives, and that they come in at a certain time and a certain moment. And who is to say that moment was not meant to be? And how it can change the pathway of life. I know, for instance, within my life, that happened at a point where then it just moved me to where I needed to be. And so I think more and more as we go through life and we have all these experiences, we need to just embrace the naturalness of it and of life. And, you know, so much of that is the healing process. And, you know, as the medium, we are the healer between two worlds, and we bring that healing.
Yes.
And, you know, what was also so wonderful was the discussion at the beginning when we were talking about how, you know, we've come in now into this age of Zoom, and yet time and space is, time and distance is man-made, not spirit-made. And that energetically, you see, we can connect wherever we are within the world, and the power and the presence of the spirit is there. And that's an extraordinary revelation, to know that that is there, and it is there for each and every one of us.
Absolutely.
And really, you know, the great traditions of the spirit have remained constant, and they have remained the same throughout time. And it is always there, but so many people, and I do believe this, only touch the surface of life, and they never take the time to really move beyond the surface to embrace the reality of all that is. Because my goodness, what richness is there. And that is really when we start to move into a time of our own light, our own understanding. And then really that's where the transformation is, because the whole of communication, the whole of understanding is all about the transformation of self. It's a great becoming, you see. I do believe that. And within the becoming, we then enter into a time of being, and it's a time of sharing, you see. And then it's just,
I've no doubt everyone is going to have loads of questions on the revolution. So I was like so tempted to ask now, but we'll all hold off all the questions until after. And I know everyone must have felt that. I felt that. Did everyone feel that? I could feel your words. It's so beautiful. And we were talking earlier about, does healing, you know, transmute online? And just for an example, I could feel and see the color and the warmth of your words, Colin. So it's just a perfect example of how it can be felt. So thank you. Isn't that absolutely wonderful? And I loved reading about you in the book, I have to say. All these myths about, you know, moving on and so forth. And I even got it the other day from somebody, is it time to move on now? And my logical scientific mind was like, move on, where do you want me to go? It's all these questions. Absolutely wonderful. I love that you touched on healing in the book, Karen. I have to say, I love that you also said it was healing for yourself. And with that, I'd love to chat now to David Schiesser about the healing aspect of mediumship, if you're happy to talk about that, David. So, and also just to explain to me, who's a non-spiritualist or non-religious, anything really, what's the D in DSNU?
Well, the D in DSNU is actually a diploma holder of the Spiritualist National Union here in the UK. So I did, in the last 7 years, I educated myself very strongly. I went through all the assessments requested, and actually the diploma is kind of one of the higher educational awards then that you can gain, and there's quite some work that goes into it. And that one is in demonstrating mediumship, which means you stand in front of people and you try to bring those two worlds together, and through what you do, you give the opportunity for people to realize that there might be actually something more than just our material way of living. So in a way, it's like, yeah, you can get diplomas. So we are quite in a rational educational system as well, which I love, I have to say, because it really forces people, or it forced me really to dig into. And this is what Karen said. It opened, when that happened, it opened for her a quest. It wasn't just given, Karen, wasn't it? It was a quest that all of a sudden you thought, well, it goes against everything that I believe in, but yet something within you, and this is not steered by an outside power, it is an inside power that we then call awakening, which is a bit new agey again, but on the other hand, a lot of people start to realize that awakening, when we call it the midlife crisis, when all of a sudden what you have is not good enough, and you try to fill those needs or something that you can't really grasp with possession or changing of families or life or whatsoever. But in its depth, what is happening with the person, they realize that there is something missing in life. But what is it? And then a quest, an endeavor would start, if we are open to it, to go for it. And healing for me was really important all my life, because I'm not classing myself as a born medium. I'm not. I came into mediumship very late, like, well, very late. It's 25 years old. It's not that late. But when you read about other mediums, they had their experiences when they were 7 or 3 years old. I can't say that about myself. I remember when my mom came up to me and she said, you need to come and see this medium and you need to do this. And then I was 18 and I thought, you know what, just bugger off. Leave me alone with all this rubbish. Honestly, rubbish. I said it, it was rubbish. What do I want with 18 and the spirit world? Nothing. Honestly, it was not within me. But what I loved within this book as well, and if you read that a bit in more depth, it's like where I started was drama. My life was terrible. And I reached that point where I really had to decide, do I move on with it or do I end it? Okay? So it was really there, really. And the point was, I then made a decision to move on, but then it started to heal. Something within me started to acknowledge that I have drama in my life. And this was not that I want to call it drama, but Karen, when you lost Johan, everything was gone. It was just dark. It was painful. You didn't have access to the rituals that are so important for us to say goodbye to someone that we love, or even to get some possessions of them that we can carry around our necks. You were denied everything of that. So for me then, when you read through that book, and you said that, Triona, as well, it's the healing. It starts to become much more lighter. How you read it, how you deal with life, and it's like all of a sudden it starts to embrace life again, even though I know you are deeply in love with Johan still. Okay, I do acknowledge that. But the point is, it still allows you to live life happily. And even maybe it allows you in the future to embrace love again as deeply as you had that before. And this is so beautiful what is explained here and what the reader actually can read through. It starts to become lighter through realization. The healing comes into being. Not that these people, not that it, how can I say that? Not that it makes it less tragic that we lost the people, but all of a sudden we realize, hey, life is about life and not about death. And this is what spiritualism always says. It's about life, guys. It's not talking to the dead. It is actually talking to the living. And you see, my mediumship, how I defined my own mediumship as a demonstrating medium is, what is mediumship? Just presenting evidential information, which is information that a recipient can evaluate and validate and say, yes, the medium knew that about this person, even though they didn't know about this, blah, blah, blah. But, well, this is just information. Why do we want this information? What is the purpose of that? The purpose for me was always healing. Because now, and I saw that recently, or we saw that on TV in Italy, COVID, people lost their loved ones, okay? And you know what was hard for them was not that they lost the people, but they didn't have the access to be with them in the moment when they transitioned into what we call the world of spirit. And that afterwards started to torment them. I wasn't there for my mom. What did I do? I should have been there. And if you go on in life with this almost blame that you weren't there, how is your life going to be? Terrible. You then deny yourself love, happiness, because you were a bad daughter, a bad son, because you weren't there when they needed you most. And you see, I can see that other people who don't believe in the world of spirit say, well, this is all a bit airy-fairy, it's a bit bonkers. But then I want to ask them, do you really have lost someone in life that you can't live without? That mother, father who lost their child through suicide. Well, yes, of course they will go on and say, what could we have done to prevent that? There is no rational explanation for anybody to accept, hey, you couldn't do anything. It was one individual's decision. It doesn't help the parents. It doesn't. It doesn't give them any release either, because they just lost their baby. And with this phenomenon of spiritualism, which is the mediumship, which is the trance, which is the healing, well, we can provide something. And Colin, when you were listening to Colin just a few minutes ago, how were you drawn in? It wasn't just the words, it was the power that was created. That there is someone in the world of spirit who looks after those that we love and lost in our world to something else. So my journey was about self-healing. It was about using that knowledge about progressing within myself. So why does it help to know, oh, there is an afterlife? Well, maybe I'm not able to achieve anything here on the earth plane. Maybe I just have a very conventional life. I don't have the millions. I will not change the world. I'm not a Mahatma Gandhi or the new Buddha walking the earth. Maybe I'm just very normal. And maybe when I pass into the world of spirit, there is not even someone who will remember me. It might be possible. I hope not, but it might be. But I also know that, okay, if there is an afterlife, that everything that I do here on the earth plane, every soul I touch, it counts how I touch them, what I create within them, because people can be very mean and unkind. So knowing that one day, and this is Mavis Patilla, I have to say, she said, what if you represent those people in the world of spirit in a not really right way? So there will be the moment when you knock on heaven's doors and all those people you represented and connected to their loved ones here on the earth plane will stand in front of you and say, David, welcome, we have to have a chat together. And he's like, oh my God. Can you imagine, like 2,000 people wanting to have a chat if I misrepresented them? So therefore, you can then see that your life matters, even though you think it doesn't. And this is the healing part, healing of the mind, realizing that I am not nobody. I am somebody who touches everyday life. When I go shopping, I smile. When I'm getting angry, I hurt. We're not saints here, but you get into a realization of self, and that's what healing is for me. And that's what my mediumship or my pathway of mediumship was, healing myself and to leave the drama behind. There is no drama needed anymore. And you know what? Life becomes so relaxed, honestly. And I can see what you wrote, and I can see that within your book, Karen. You got relaxed with it. It doesn't really matter if anybody believes in the afterlife. It doesn't, because it's a personal endeavor. Mm. But if you found that, and you know that your life matters and happiness matters for you and others, then come on, let's heal. Let's bring those messages of love. Let's give that realization to a mom or a dad. You know what? Even though you weren't there, even though you couldn't save, everything is okay, because they're still there. And what you said was really interesting about progress open to every human soul. that Johann changed himself in the world of spirit, that actually just proves the fact that what we actually want to prove is that consciousness lives on.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it needs to move and become more enlightened. If the people just stayed the way they were when we knew them in the world of spirit, then I would doubt the fact that it is a living force.
Mm.
But of course, they start to move within their consciousness. And maybe someone who decided to leave this life realizes, oh, what did I cause to those that I left behind? So of course they need to have healing on different levels. And when you can create that, why not? Beautiful. Healing is the absolute foundation, I have to say.
Yeah, no, it's so beautiful, and it's lovely to see, and I've seen that in my mother as well. You know, my mother and I had quite a tumultuous relationship quite a lot of the time. And when she passed the spirit world, I've noticed that it's been a few years now. And it's not that she's a different person, she's the same person, but there's been a sort of a softening. It's almost like in a different, you know, in that environment, she's healing some of her issues herself. And I've noticed a sort of a slight change even in just how we interacted. And so sometimes I'm just astonished at the things she shows up to help me with. You know, and I know that it's because she's been that the healing continues there as well as here.
I believe that very strongly too.
Yeah, beautiful.
I do too, actually. Yeah, I do. That was absolutely lovely. Thank you, David. It's so incredible. And, you know, so many people just carry this grief and this sadness and this loss for so long. So just the power of the healing of the medium or mediumship or even inspirational words or the book is just really lovely. So we're just here and we're talking about Karen's book, Till Death Don't Us Part, with Colin Bates and David Schiesser. So Karen, I'm just going to suggest to everyone that we will be getting around to Q&A now shortly. So if you have any questions, perhaps pop them into the chat now. If you have a question for David, Colin or Karen in particular, then just mention their name, but otherwise just keep it a general question, and we will be getting around to them. We are going to be talking about a little excerpt. I'm going to have to learn how to say that. Excerpt. There you go, from the book shortly, Karen. So will we do that now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can just read this very short excerpt while you're just typing questions in the box. This actually, and this, I think this will sort of testify to what David was just saying. This comes from the end of the book. So you can, I read earlier from the beginning of the book, those scary things. And after the whole thing went on, this was something I realized towards the end that I thought very short. I thought I'd just read or just doing questions. The following Sunday, I wrapped myself in fleece, took my tea in the New York Times, climbed into the thicket and sat on a rock under the yellow trees to read. There were cafes in the neighborhood and benches in the park, but I needed quiet and peace. Mona Simpson's eulogy for her brother Steve Jobs, who had died 2 weeks before, appeared in the opinion section. She shared memories of his life, his capacity for wonderment, his lack of cynicism, his belief that love happened all the time, everywhere. At his moment of death, he looked at those around his bed, his sister, children, life partner, and then looked over their shoulders and said, and she wrote this with emphasis, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." I wouldn't have understood that the year before. I would have attributed that to a flood of endorphins or the loss of oxygen to the eye. But now I'd seen glimmers of the oh wow when I woke up to messages of endearment and navigated my day and my way, knowing I wasn't alone, that help was at hand, and that love was truly eternal. I'd seen it in how lovers and families and children reunite, how pets remember, how suicides heal, how people in spirit find purpose, and how they have infinite capacity for love and forgiveness and intimacy. I'd seen it in the joy and the remorse that had been shared with me from the world of spirit, the need to express words left unsaid, the needs to recall memories shared, the need to show that bonds endure, and the simpleness need of all to say, I did not die, I am here, and I love you. Mona Simpson wrote that in the end we die in medias res, in the middle of a story. I knew now that death is in medias res. Death is the middle of our story. I knew not from faith but from experience that the rest of our existence is lived out in formlessness, not in some far-off place over there, up there, down there, through a tunnel of light. If the physicist who devised string theory or membrane theory can say that there are 10 or 11 dimensions existing around us along with the 3 we perceive, was it so hard to believe that the afterlife is right here in the same stream of consciousness shared by the spirit and physical worlds, where everyday unspoken words and intuitive feelings are silently expressed between the living and the living, and the living and the so-called dead? I now knew that in the collective consciousness, the discarnate were only ever thought away from us and us from them. How many times had I thought of Johann and felt him respond? Wasn't it just as likely that he had thought of me and I felt his thoughts and I responded? I wondered how many times in a day we think we are thinking about our loved ones when they are actually thinking about us. The wind grew sharp. I could feel the chill in my spine. I clambered down the rock face and along the trail back to the city streets. I passed a mother trying to strap her screaming child into a stroller. He was arching his back and kicking and protesting as much as he could to avoid being tied down. I wondered if he ever saw the spirits of his ancestors the way children who have recently come out of the spirit and into physical form did. The veil is thin for those on the cusp of entering and those on the cusp of leaving this life. I wondered if his mother dismissed them as imaginary friends, as mine had done. Johann had opened this door, and now I wanted to do more. I wanted to receive and share more than just details for those in the spirit world. I wanted to be able to share their memories of life past and witness their continued existence. I wanted to show that they participate in their loved ones' physical lives, are aware of their challenges, and are offering to help. I wanted to be able to tell their story, the story that they wanted to tell. I wanted to comfort the bereaved the way Johann's presence had comforted me. The comfort he offered by connecting me with his mother, the love and the compassion he offered when my Auntie Terry had died, the fear of death he'd taken away, the hope he'd given me, the sense of purpose, and above all, his unconditional love.
Oh, that was just so beautiful. Thank you. Nearly got a little teary there. It's actually embarrassing. I cried twice when I was reading my book. So we're talking about Till Death Don't Us Part by Frances McCarthy. It is available, isn't that right, on Kindle, and to actually receive the physical paperback at the moment, Karen. We'll chat about that in a few moments. So we can only take questions on Zoom. I'm afraid we just don't have access to visibility of the Facebook listeners today. So everyone on Zoom. So the first question, I have one or two of my own, but I'm going to try to be really restrained and hold back. So George, is that correct? The right name? Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, George, or J-O or J-E. So he's halfway through the book, Karen. He's absolutely loving it. He's also lost his wife of 23 years, so he can really relate to everything you're going through. He'd like to know a little bit more about the signs, because he's getting signs and signals, which is wonderful that you're aware of them and listening to them. And he also wants your thoughts on lucid dreaming. And I know this comes up all the time. So do you believe that your loved ones and Johann is communicating with you through lucid dreams?
Yeah, it has happened. I think they're commonly called, and Colin, I'm sure, can talk about this as well. They're commonly called visitation dreams. And what I have experienced when I've had them, I only had a couple, to be honest, is they're very, very, very vivid. They're not like a normal dream that's kind of woolly and fuzzy, but they're very vivid, and you just feel like you're in a different place. I mean, when I was having them, lucid means you're aware you're dreaming. So I wasn't aware I was dreaming. I actually thought I was in this place with him, when we had that very, very vibrant and very, very realistic dream. And I didn't obviously realize until I woke up the next morning it had been a dream at all. So I can attest to visitation dreams. I can't speak to lucid dreams. I've had a few lucid dreams in my time, but I've personally never had him show up in a lucid dream, just in those visitation dreams. But they've been immensely powerful and very, very healing. And I have spoken to a few other people who've had them and found the same thing. There's just something, it's like that epiphany, just something that happens that just causes this great shift in consciousness. And so they're very, very valuable. So, that, you know, if that answers your question, Jorge, I don't know if Colin, if you have something you wanted to add to that.
Well, really, very similar. I mean, the lucid dream is when you've woken up and you've gone back to sleep, and then there is an awareness of your own mind within the dream.
Mm.
And in the lucid dream, you'll jump off a cliff because you know that you're dreaming. So there's more of an awareness there within that moment. But there is a phenomena of the spirits called somnambulistic clairvoyance. And that is the ability to dream and foretell of the spirit within the sleep state. And often you see, if we look at it in regard to an altered state of consciousness, we're then able to perceive things within the sleep state that we would not necessarily experience within the physical state, in the awakened state. And so for me, it makes perfect sense that while we are within that more relaxed state, it's possible to experience the healing of the spirit. It's possible to have an awareness or a visitation within the sleep state. I mean, look at the writings of Edgar Cayce, for instance, the sleeping prophet, and all the things that he experienced, and Andrew Jackson Davis, he's walking within the summerland, within the sleep state. So one of the things that I often look at within such moments is try and write it down, because our own recall of moments, although they may seem very real, they disappear quite easily. So within the first few minutes of waking is the strongest moment of recall. Write it down and then remember within it. The secret is to be the observer, because if you start to question during, then it takes you back into the physical aspect and then you've lost it. So really, you know, with a lot of the experiences of the spirit, try and just observe the process. Try not to interact mentally, because then you'll experience it more within the fullness. And so I would say absolutely.
So David, I have a question for you, if I can. You mentioned the stillness and going into the stillness. How would you help or advise people to get to the place for everyone to kind of connect to spirit and the healing power of spirit?
Well, the point is, I believe that everybody is connected to the spirit. They don't have to learn it. They just have to learn to recognize that they are already connected. Because we walk is like what Colin said. You cannot be where God is not. So in the way, it's like now within the spiritualist philosophy, we say every one of us carries the God force within them. Okay, so this is this spark, this light within is your connection to the world of spirit. Stillness is a discipline, I have to say. The only person who can find it is yourself, in allowing yourself to be quiet. But and this is the problem, who wants to listen to themselves if they don't call David Schiesser? I like to listen to myself, but no, it's just a joke. Sorry. But in a way, it's like you really need to start reflecting upon yourself. What is you, the real you? Because we are so many things to so many people. And sometimes we stepped into roles as babies already. That who are you? So it's sometimes a very painful moment to then say, okay, I need to withdraw for a moment from everything that I love, everybody that I love, to realize who am I within my spirit, the spirit self. It's not what I show you and you can see and we talk about. I have many faces, but what is the true me? And people don't know that. How can we? Because society doesn't want our true you. They want to have a certain person. In the corporate world, they want to have someone who is always good, who is always nice and smiling. If you traumatized, if you are grieving, don't come to work. We can't deal with such things. If you lose it at work, it's like, oh my God, history, you lost it. This is not appropriate. But actually, that's life, isn't it? It's all the aspect of life and who we are. We are that wheel of emotions. And what I can recommend you is just to sit and start listening to your own vibration. That's a nice one. I don't want to call it to your own power, but to the vibration that you emanate into this world. And this is a real practice. I call that spiritual practice. Starting to listen to yourself. What is this that I am? How many times do I say yes to things that I actually would say no if I was honest with myself? But then life-changing questions will arise. So because we live in a society, once you said yes, you said yes. So your loyalty, you are bound to what you agreed to, and don't you dare changing your opinion. But fact is, and that's a very nice saying, you laugh every day afresh. You decide every day to want to be together with someone. Just because I once said I want to be with you doesn't mean that in 20 years that's still the case. So in a way, it's an everyday thing. And that's what we have to bring forward in our consciousness, that life is not controllable as we so thought it was. And the only thing that I can look after and control is my own thought process. And this is what needs to happen. Sit in silence with yourself. You might hear the noises of your own mind, but then with practice that will quieting down, and then all of a sudden you will hear your true self. And this is something beautiful. This is something beautiful.
Colin, you mentioned earlier about this revolution that you feel and sense is happening. Would you be comfortable to talk about it for a moment?
Well, when I speak of what I actually said was, can you imagine what a revolution would be created instantaneously if everybody, but for one moment, began to realize that we're all equal and we are all interconnected through the same source of all light? Because, however you choose to perceive your own pathway or perception of the divine purpose of life, and indeed there are many, they all lead to that same point, which is the great mystery of all life, which people throughout history have sought to understand and to embrace in their own unique individual way. And that is right, you see, because it exists. It's a state of consciousness, and the power of the mind and its ability to create, we have an understanding of. And so really, this awakening that's taking place now within the world, we are having to stand still, and we're having to look, and we're having to create a unity throughout the world to deal with all the situations that is happening. From that, other aspects to do with equality and life are coming much more into the fore. And really, that is an incredible time. But what we also have to take into consideration is, if we go back the hundreds of years, the realization and the consciousness of that wasn't there, because mankind wasn't at that level of understanding within life. And so we are moving forward. We are coming into this time of light and knowledge within our own existence. But it is in the realization that my goodness, we are all part of the great stupendous whole, because we cannot be other. The stories of the Bible about the of Babel, the Tower of Babel, and when it fell, everyone scattered and they all spoke in a different language. They all originally came from the same source. And really, if we look more towards that, and we focus upon that which is the same within all of us, how we are different tends to be less and less. And if you look at the common ground, where that moment of coming together, I mean, part of my work as a minister is I'm also a prison chaplain. And so I go in and I visit people on a regular basis. And when I go there, you have everybody from every religion comes together. And you would never find more of a supportive, energetic people. And this really is where the spiritual aspect comes into its own, because not only does it acknowledge everyone's right for their own sense of belief, but it supports it. And so although we don't have definitive answers, we respect the right to create them. And that's equality. And I feel that that is really where, you know, and we say the word revolution, it's just a term, it's just a sense of being. But if you stop for one moment, truly, if you stop for one moment and look at the conscious power of thought, its ability to heal, its ability to communicate throughout the whole of the world, can you begin to imagine if there was one single thought within everyone, within one moment, what it would create? You know, look at a stadium, look at how many people it holds. If there was 5 minutes there where everyone thought of the positive power of the heart and of healing and of love, what it would create, what a force it would create, because the conscious mind has an ability to link with each other. I do believe that. It's proven itself throughout all the wars of the world, you know, and quite often people don't even know. They're trained from such an early age to hate. But if you to ask what it is they hate, they don't actually really know what it is. So you see, it's such a simplistic idea, but at the same time, it can also be complex. But, you know, really, where forever love and light exist, you will always find the spirit. And in its simplest term, it's love. And you know, anger and will never solve a problem. It will only perpetrate the problem, I promise you, because it creates more anger. And then you've got violence. And does it solve a problem? I don't know that it does. It brings attention to it, but does it really solve it? I think that's what we have to look at as well, possibly.
Thank you. Well, that was so beautiful. Lovely message. I know we need to wrap up now. Just Colin, thank you so much. And David Schiesser, I had to learn how to pronounce that, and Karen. So look, this is Till Death Don't Us Part. It's published by White Crow Books, and it's a memoir of Karen. And I know for me, and I know for a lot of you, it's a love story. It's also like information and knowledge about the awakening, so you'll gain some technical information there about from Karen because of her journey, and it is about healing, mediumship, the afterlife, a world that we don't always visibly see every day. This is it. So you haven't got it, go get it. It's out now before it sells out. So I had to wait patiently for 3 weeks for mine. I couldn't wait to get it.
We got Howard's, and it's an extraordinary book from an extraordinary soul. And our love is with you. And thank you so much for asking us. And just lovely to meet you all. Super.
Karen, do you want to just finish up?
I just want to say, and, you know, thank you to Colin and David, who are just very beautiful souls, I have to say, on the planet, just sort of sitting. I was just saying, I went and I sat on a 4-day course with Colin last weekend just so I could sit in the energy. I don't even think I did any work for the whole 4 days. I just sat there just lapping up the energy. So it's beautifully beautiful and healing. I know David is doing some lovely healing work as well online. So I'm really happy, and of course eternally grateful for the meeting we had 10 years ago, because that really helped me get on the right track in my own life and then be able to help other people. So thank you always for that. And I hope you enjoy the book. Somebody's just posted that they've started a book club. If you want to message me with that book club, because other people have asked about that, just send me a message about that, or we want people to join, because I got a couple of messages, people asking me if there was a book club on Facebook. And thank you very much to Triona. I hope if you read the book that you enjoy it. I hope that it presents a story in such a way that you can either accept it or reject it, whatever feels right for you. And that just, as I say, goes across the board with all belief systems. We really, and as Colin said, what we really need is just honesty and openness. We don't need more dogmatism. We really need sort of just an inquiring mind and tolerance of others' views. So regardless of whether you believe what I wrote or not, I hope you do find it at least entertaining and hopefully healing. And I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions that we didn't get to today, you can just post them on Facebook and we'll try to address them again in another meeting. We've got some more coming up. Again, thank you, Colin. Thank you so much, Triona.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The technical wizard, you made it
Thanks,
all.
Colin and David. Yeah, I'll definitely check you both out. And well, that sounds really dodgy, doesn't it? I'll go check out what training and teaching you're offering. So I'm sure you're there on Facebook and a website. And the same as Karen. What's your website, Karen, for the book?
Well, Colin, your website is colinbates.com, is that right?
Well, I think Minister Colin Bates, Spiritual Healer on Facebook is better, because my website I haven't updated for years.
Oh, and same, I know that goes for David as well. Hasn't done any work on his website. So David is David Schiesser, Schiesser on Facebook if you want to connect. Yeah. My website is KarenFrancesMedium.com, or just Karen Frances McCarthy on Facebook if you want to connect.
Super. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon, Karen.
Yes, in person, for sure.
Yes, in person.
Central Park.
Thank you.